The iron gates of the Oak Ridge Cemetery didn't creak. They groaned, a heavy metallic sound that signaled the start of a ritual the town of Oak Ridge had witnessed every single day for the last 5 years. At exactly 3:14 p.m., a scruffy, amber-eyed terrier mix named Cooper would trot through those gates. He didn't stop to sniff the flowers or chase the squirrels that darted between the headstones. He moved with the focused, solemn gait of a man on a mission. To the locals, Cooper was a living monument to loyalty. They called him the Ghost of Oak Ridge. Travelers would pull over their cars just to snap a photo of the dog sitting motionless beside a weathered, moss-covered grave in the furthest corner of the Pauper's Field, a section of the cemetery reserved for those who died with no name and no family. But here was the detail that kept the town's curiosity simmering at a boil. The grave Cooper guarded was unmarked. There was no name, no date, and no epitaph, just a slab of grey stone sinking slowly into the earth. For half a decade, the people of Oak Ridge assumed Cooper was mourning a lost master, perhaps a homeless man or a lonely traveler who had passed through town and died forgotten. They felt sorry for him. They brought him steak scraps and warm blankets during the harsh winter months. But as the years bled into one another, a local journalist named Sarah began to notice something chilling. Cooper wasn't just sitting by the grave. Every afternoon before he left, the dog would perform a specific rhythmic sequence of actions, digging exactly 3 inches into the soil, placing a small, smooth river stone into the hole, and then covering it back up. When Sarah finally decided to investigate what was hidden beneath that empty grave, she didn't find the remains of a forgotten man. She found a secret that reached back 40 years, involving the town's founding families, and a crime that had been erased from the history books. Cooper wasn't mourning a master. He was guarding the evidence of a betrayal that was about to blow the town of Oak Ridge wide open. Oak Ridge was a town built on old bones and even older secrets. Tucked away in a valley where the fog seemed to linger a little too long, it was a place where everyone's lineage was meticulously documented in the town hall, except for the inhabitant of the grave in Plot 402. For the residents of Oak Ridge, the mystery of the ghost dog was a point of local pride, a touching story of animal devotion that brought in curious tourists and a sense of collective pity. They saw Cooper as a symbol of unconditional love, a dog who refused to let his owner be forgotten, even if the rest of the world had never known the man's name. Sarah Jenkins, however, wasn't prone to sentimentality. As the lead reporter of the Oak Ridge Gazette, she had a nose for inconsistencies. She had spent months watching Cooper from the edge of the cemetery, noting the mechanical precision of his arrivals. Dogs mourn, she knew, but Cooper's behavior felt less like grief and more like a job. While the townspeople saw a heartbroken pet, Sarah saw a sentinel. The Pauper's Field was a desolate stretch of land where the grass grew thick and wild, contrasting sharply with the manicured lawns of the town's elite families on the hill. Plot 402 sat right at the edge of the tree line. Strangely, there was no record of who was buried there. The cemetery ledger from 40 years ago had mysteriously gone missing from the town hall archives. As Sarah dug into the town's history, she realized that the mid-80s was a period of sudden, unexplained silence in local records, coinciding with the rise of the town's most powerful political family. The more Sarah watched Cooper deposit those smooth river stones into the earth, the more she realized the dog wasn't just waiting for a master. He was protecting a secret that had been silenced decades before he was even born. Sarah's investigation began not with the dog, but with the stones. On a Tuesday afternoon, after Cooper had finished his ritual and trotted back toward the woods, Sarah walked over to Plot 402. She knelt in the damp grass and carefully brushed away the top layer of soil where Cooper had been digging. Just as she expected, she found a small, smooth, blue-tinted river stone. She took it to a local geologist at the community college. He didn't even need a microscope. "This isn't from the Oak Ridge River," he said, pushing his glasses up his nose. "This is blue quartz. In this entire state, there's only one place you can find this, the Miller Quarry. But that place has been fenced off and abandoned since the mid-80s. The Miller Quarry." The name sent a chill down Sarah's spine. The Miller family had founded Oak Ridge and still owned most of the commercial real estate in the valley. The current mayor, Thomas Miller, was a man who prided himself on the town's clean image. The quarry had been closed overnight in 1986 following a geological instability, or so the official story went. But why was a dog, born decades after the quarry closed, bringing stones from a restricted site to an unmarked grave? And more importantly, how was he getting into the quarry? Sarah decided to track Cooper's path. The next day, instead of watching him at the cemetery, she waited at the edge of the woods. When Cooper finished his visit at 4 p.m., she followed him at a distance. He didn't go to a house or a shelter. He navigated through the thick brush with surgical precision, leading her deep into the hills until they reached the rusted chain-link fence of the Miller quarry. To Sarah's amazement, Cooper didn't jump the fence. He crawled through a small hidden tunnel dug beneath the concrete foundation of an old guard shack. Sarah watched from the shadows as the dog emerged on the other side, trotted to a specific pile of blue quartz rubble, and delicately picked up a stone in his mouth. While he was occupied, Sarah explored the guard shack. It was a ruin of rotting wood and shattered glass, but under a loose floorboard she found a rusted metal tin. Inside was a photograph from 1986. It showed a young man, not a miller, standing in front of the quarry. He looked kind, with tired eyes and a tool belt. Standing at his heels was a dog that looked nearly identical to Cooper, the same amber eyes, the same scruffy coat. On the back of the photo, a name was scrawled in fading ink: Elias Vance and Barnaby. The truth is under the blue. Sarah realized then that Cooper wasn't just a random stray. He was a descendant of Barnaby, and he was carrying out a biological mandate, a memory passed down through bloodlines. Elias Vance was the name of the man in Plot 402, and for some reason the town of Oakridge had spent 40 years trying to pretend he never existed. Elias Vance was a ghost in more ways than one. When Sarah returned to the archives, she didn't look for birth certificates, she looked for payroll records. Hidden in a mislabeled box of construction expenses 1984-1988, she finally found his name. Elias hadn't been a common laborer. He was a site surveyor, the man responsible for measuring the structural integrity of the Miller quarry. According to the dusty logs, Elias had filed a series of frantic reports in the weeks leading up to the quarry's closure. He claimed the instability wasn't geological, it was man-made. The millers weren't just mining stone, they were using the deep subterranean shafts to dispose of industrial chemical waste from their factories, poisoning the valley's water table. Elias had threatened to go to the federal authorities. 2 days later, the quarry was blasted shut in a controlled demolition, and Elias Vance was never seen again. The official story was that he had skipped town to avoid debt. Sarah realized with a jolt of horror that the pauper's grave, Plot 402, wasn't a burial for a nameless man. It was a dumping ground for the one man who could have destroyed the Miller empire. That night, Sarah returned to the cemetery. She brought a shovel, her heart hammering against her ribs. She felt Cooper's eyes on her. The dog was sitting on a nearby hill, his silhouette sharp against the rising moon. He didn't bark. He watched her with a heavy, ancient patience, as if he had been waiting 40 years for someone finally to understand. Sarah began to dig. She bypassed the top layer where Cooper placed his stones and went deeper. At 3 feet, her shovel struck something hard, not stone, but metal. It was a heavy industrial lockbox, encrusted with the same blue quartz Cooper had been collecting. As she pried the box open, she found it stuffed with plastic-wrapped documents, Elias's original survey maps, photos of the illegal dumping, and a handwritten letter. The letter was a desperate plea signed by Elias, detailing how he feared for his life and had hidden the evidence here, in a plot he had bought under a false name, trusting only his dog, Barnaby, to keep the site marked. But how did Cooper know? Barnaby had died decades ago. Sarah looked at the dog on the hill. Genetic memory was a scientific theory often debated, but here was the proof. For generations, the descendants of Barnaby had been drawn to this spot, driven by a biological imperative to keep the soil active, to bring the blue stones from the scene of the crime to the site of the evidence. Cooper wasn't just a loyal pet, he was a living timer, a sentinel waiting for the moment the truth was finally unearthed. You know, as I'm telling you about Cooper and the way he carried a secret across generations, it makes me think about the pets in our own lives. They see so much more than we give them credit for, don't they? They are the silent keepers of our hearts and our homes. If you're feeling as moved by Cooper's journey as I am, I'd love for you to join our little circle here. Hit that subscribe button, not because a prompt told you to, but because you value these stories of deep, unspoken connection as much as we do. And tell me something in the comments, just between us. Have you ever looked at your pet and felt like they were trying to tell you something from a long time ago? I'd truly love to hear your stories. Each one of you makes this community feel like a real home. The roar of a high-powered engine shattered the graveyard's silence before Sarah could even finish reading the first page of Elias's letter. Blinding high beams cut through the fog, illuminating the headstones like jagged teeth. A black SUV screeched to a halt, just yards from plot 402. Sarah clutched the rusted lockbox to her chest, her heart hammering. Out stepped Mayor Thomas Miller. He didn't look like the polished politician seen on campaign posters. His tie was loose and his eyes were wild, with a desperate, cornered energy. Behind him, two men in dark suits, private security, fanned out, cutting off Sarah's exit toward the main gates. "That's private property you're digging up, Sarah," Miller said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. "Desecrating a grave is a serious offense. Give me the box, and we can forget this ever happened. You're a talented journalist. Don't ruin your life over a dead man and a stray dog." Sarah stood her ground, the weight of the metal box cold against her arms. Elias Vance wasn't just a dead man, Thomas. He was a witness. And this isn't a grave. It's a crime scene. You didn't just kill him. You buried the truth of what you did to this valley right here, thinking nobody would ever look twice at a pauper's field. Miller stepped forward, his face contorting. "In this town, the truth is whatever I say it is. Now give it to me." Just as the security guards moved to close in, a low, vibrating growl echoed from the darkness of the tree line. It wasn't the sound of a small terrier mix. It was a sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. Cooper stepped into the light of the SUV's beams. He didn't bark. He stood directly between Sarah and the mayor, his hackles raised, his amber eyes glowing with a fierce, ancient intelligence. In that moment, the air seemed to thicken. It wasn't just Cooper standing there. To Sarah, it felt as if the shadows of a dozen dogs, the generations of Barnaby's bloodline who had kept this vigil, were standing behind him. The security guards hesitated, a primal fear flickering across their faces. There was something unnatural, something destined about the dog's defiance. "Get that animal out of the way," Miller hissed, but his voice lacked conviction. Sarah took her chance. She pulled her smartphone from her pocket, the camera already live-streaming to the Oak Ridge Gazette's social media page. "It's too late, Thomas. Thousands of people are watching this. The documents are already on camera. The maps, the photos of the dumping, the letters, it's all out there." The mayor collapsed into the seat of his SUV, the realization of his downfall hitting him like a physical blow. The ghost dog had done more than just mourn. He had held the line until the world was ready to listen. Within 48 hours, federal agents swarmed the Miller quarry. The lockbox provided the smoking gun needed to bypass the local authorities. They found the chemical canisters, and more tragically, they found the remains of Elias Vance exactly where his survey maps indicated he had been silenced. The Miller legacy crumbled overnight as arrests were made and the town began the long, painful process of healing its land and its history. With the fall of the Miller dynasty, the heavy fog that had long defined Oak Ridge finally seemed to lift. The town was no longer a place of whispered secrets. It became a site of historic reckoning. The pauper's grave in plot 402 was no longer unmarked. Today, a beautiful monument of polished granite stands there, funded by the townspeople who felt a collective debt to the man they had allowed to be forgotten. The inscription reads, "Elias Vance. He spoke for the land and the land never forgot." But the most profound change wasn't the monument, it was the dog. On the day the headstone was unveiled, Cooper arrived at his usual time, 3:14 p.m. A crowd had gathered, watching in silence. Sarah Jenkins stood at the front, her hand resting on the cool stone. Cooper trotted up, but for the first time in 5 years, he didn't have a blue quartz stone in his mouth. He didn't dig. He didn't perform the rhythmic ritual that had puzzled the town for so long. He simply walked to the base of the headstone, circled 3 times, and let out a long, weary sigh. He laid his head down on the fresh grass and closed his eyes. The mission that had been etched into his very DNA, passed down from Barnaby through the decades, was finally complete. The truth was out, the land was being healed, and his master's name was spoken with honor. Sarah eventually took Cooper home. He is no longer the ghost of Oakridge. He is a local hero, spending his golden years sleeping in a sun-drenched patch of Sarah's office, though he still makes a weekly trip to the cemetery, not as a sentinel, but as a friend. The story of Cooper reminds us that loyalty isn't just an emotion, it's a force of nature. It can bridge generations, survive silence, and eventually, if we are patient enough to listen, it can unearth the truth. In the end, the people of Oakridge learned that while humans may forget their history, the earth, and those who guard it, never does.